ovulation or bleeding, endometrial lining degenerates. And this is what causes actually the bleeding, because when the endometrial lining is shed off, is slowed off, this is going to expose the blood vessels beneath. And because those blood vessels are exposed, the bleeding is going to take place. During follicular phase, when we're talking about the ovarian cycle, we call the phases that come before ovulation follicular phase. But when we're talking about the changes that take place at the level of the uterus, we call the days that come before ovulation, we call them proliferation phase. And this name is given actually because the endometrium at these days, just after the menses, yani between day 6 and day 13, the endometrial lining will be thickening. So there will be thickening of the endometrial lining, and this is why we say it is the proliferation phase. So proliferation phase is multiplication phase. And this name is usually given in the uterine cycle, yani the cycle of the uterus before the day 14, before ovulation takes place. What's happening at the level of the uterus is the thickening of the endometrial lining. So this is why we call it proliferation phase. Also, while the endometrial lining is thickening, the glands at the level of the uterus also start to develop, they start to enlarge, and the uterus will become richly supplied with blood vessels. All of these take place during the proliferation phase. So remember that in the pre-ovulatory phase, the changes that take place at the level of the uterus are from day 1 till day 5, there will be the menses. Now we're gonna see that in a very nice document that's gonna follow this slide. And then between day 6 and day 13, there will be thickening of the endometrial lining along with development of the uterine glands and the supply with blood vessels. Now after ovulation, so in the post-ovulatory phase, in the uterus, the uterine cycle will be in its secretory phase. And this is, it's given this name, secretory phase, because the endometrium becomes thick enough in case fertilization has taken place. The endometrium is now very well thick in order for implantation to take place. The glands are very well developed, and we call them in this case the uterine lace. Okay, so the uterine lace is given for it's the terminology given whenever the glands of the uterus are very well developed, and they are very well developed after they pass through the secretory phase. So these are the basic or the main changes that take place at the level of the ovulatory phase, where the follicles will start developing until only one becomes the Graafian follicle, which will rupture on day 14 and release its egg cell, where the remnants or the remaining cells of the follicle will change into the corpus luteum, which in turn change into the corpus albicans in case no fertilization has taken place. On the other hand, speaking about the uterine cycle, in the beginning of the uterine cycle, there will be 5 days approximately. So the number of days might differ from one lady to another, from 3 to 8. Can be also normal. So these are the days of bleeding or menses or period, and after that comes the proliferation phase, where the endometrial lining becomes starts to thicken actually, and the uterine glands start to develop along with the blood vessels as well. And the luteal phase, or what's known as the post-ovulatory phase, which is also known as secretory phase in the uterine cycle. In this stage, the endometrium becomes very well thick, the glands at the level of the uterus become very well developed, and we call them in this case the uterine lace. So other changes can also take place in the other reproductive organs of the female, like the cervix, the vagina, and the oviducts as well. And there is also a change at the level of the body temperature. We're gonna see how the body temperature varies in the sexual cycle of the female. So this is a common slide that we discussed in class. This is the ovulatory this is the ovulatory cyclic changes that takes place.